Hi, welcome to Ilsley Public Library. This is our first attempt at a pre-recorded program. So I have invited Corey Hart from the Vermont Fisheries and Wildlife Department to talk to us about fishing. Today we're going to focus on how to get started. But before we do that, let's meet Corey.
Hi,
Corey.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so pleased you were willing to do this with me.
Not a problem.
And I think I'd like to start out by just asking how you became interested in doing what you're doing.
Yeah. So first off, my name's Corey Hart. I'm Fish and Wildlife. I work for Fish and Wildlife as an education specialist. I first got started with it. I went to Unity College in Maine, majoring primarily in conservation law enforcement. Was my major there. From there, though, while I was in college, I got hired working for the Green Mountain Conservation Camps for Fish and Wildlife, which is another program that we operate. We operate basically a youth summer camp. And I started working there and really fell in love with outdoor education. From there, I did a couple different positions with Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and then eventually I started as our education specialist, specializing mainly in aquatic education, or our basically fishing education is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And having fished my whole life and really loving fishing, it's kind of a perfect fit.
I guess so. So you grew up in Maine?
Yes.
And you did fishing with your family, or was there something
Yeah,
you did?
so basically, as long as I can remember, we'd always go out fishing as a family. So we'd go out mainly with my father, would take me and my brothers. So we had to think about that for a second. But 2 brothers and a sister, so we'd all go out fishing. And it's kind of like a family thing.
Oh, that's great.
So whether it be ice fishing or open water fishing for like trout, primarily we'd fish for trout growing up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. So that is a kind of a good segue for me, because as I was questioning folks in the library today about if you were coming to this program, what would you want to ask? And overwhelmingly, I got a number of people said, my kids want to fish. I don't fish. I don't know anything about fishing. How do I help them get started?
There's a couple real easy ways to get started. In a normal year, when we don't have COVID,
right,
which is affecting a whole lot of other things, as you know, we operate what's called the Let's Go Fishing program, which is one of my main responsibilities that I'm in charge of, which is essentially a fishing education program. Each year we reach about 8,000 Vermonters through that program, and we go to schools, rec departments, we conduct programs for the public. And those programs focus on basic fishing education. So it's everything from how to tie your hook onto the line, understanding basic aquatic ed, aquatic ecology, understanding basic conservation principles, regulations, and of course casting and fishing to get it out there. But we really emphasize that it's more than just fishing. So instead of just focusing on how to cast a line and catch a fish, we're focusing on all the other details that you need to know. This year, you can't really do that.
Right.
So we've done a few programs, so it's been pretty slow just because of the restrictions with being able to touch different equipment and do a lot of the hands-on things that we've done in the past.
Right.
So there are a lot. We've been working on more online resources that you can find right on our website. So there's a lot of resources there for families starting to get started or starting to go out fishing. We've also been offering what's called Fish with a Warden Program, which we're going to be continuing for next year as well. Which, even though we're having this now on Thursday, that's our last date, so we're a little slow on that one.
Oh, well.
But for next year, it's a good opportunity. So what that is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's Fish with a Warden. So we encourage people to come out. If you have no fishing experience, that's fine. We'll get you pointed in the right direction. But it's kind of an informal opportunity for people to come out, ask the local warden any questions they may have about regulations, or whether it be how to use certain tackle that's in your tackle box, and then we just spread out and go fishing.
That's great.
And it's as simple as that.
That's great. Now, being a non-fisher woman, I wonder about, I know there's ice fishing, so basically you can fish all year long, but I assume that there are different times of the year that are better for certain fish, and I bet you there's even laws about when you can fish for what.
You can fish all year long depending on the body of water. So there's some bodies of water or species that you can't fish for all year long. And you can find all of that right in the regulation book.
Oh, great.
You can also find that right on our website as well. So there's actually an online tool that you can use that, for those of you that if you might struggle a little bit with finding the regs in here, You can use the online tool, and it'll tell you the regs for the body of water that you want to fish. So you can just type in that body of water, and it'll pop up with those regulations. But in a future episode, we can go over in more detail how to use this book.
Great. Now you're going to give up any of your
But it looks hard. It's really not. No.
It's not hard. You're going to give up any secrets? Where to go? Where's the best fishing hole for bass?
Sure. So you were talking
you tell me.
When you talk best fishing hole, that's a whole other thing. Yeah. Everyone's going to have their own particular spot.
Yeah.
But really, I think what you're looking for is more for better family friendly spots, kind of spots where you can take a group of kids out or a family and spread out along the shore.
Yes.
And that can be a challenge sometimes to find a spot. Just for one person is pretty easy, where you get enough room to fish. When you start looking at 10 people where you all have enough room to cast, then it can get a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
But Addison County has a lot of really good spots. But it depends on what you're trying to fish for, too.
Right.
One of the more popular spots is right in Virgins at the Basin.
Okay.
So that town park they have right there is an
kinda
excellent
down
spot.
under
You can
the bridge?
catch.
Yeah.
Basically right on the other side of the falls, where they have. I believe there's a launch right there, and there's a big town park. You can catch just about anything right there on the Otter Creek.
Wow.
That's a really good spot where your options for different types of fish species are really variable there. So it's an excellent spot.
Oh, great. So that's
and
good.
there's so much room to spread out there as well.
All right. What season are we in right now for fish?
So right now, you're still in your standard season. So you can do. People are bass fishing still. There's still trout fishing to be had. Basically, all your standard fishing and fish for. What's changing though is the water temps are cooling down.
Yes.
So basically, people are changing what they're going to be targeting for a little bit. So whereas, we're still kind of in a drought right now. A lot of the streams are low, but the water temps had been really warm, so people weren't targeting trout as much. Where when the water temps get so warm, they're a lot harder to target, you don't want to target them because you don't want to tire them out if you're doing catch and release.
I see.
But now that the temps are cooling back down, you're going to see people start to target those trout again.
Oh, well, that's interesting. So trout like it cooler is what I'm getting.
So typically for brook trout, they like 68 degrees and lower. So when the water temp gets warmer, you're not going to find those fish there. So what some anglers even do, a lot of fly fishermen use this, is they'll bring a thermometer with them. And they'll just kind of stick that in the water.
Wow.
If that's showing a temperature like 75, 80 degrees, and you want to fish for brookies, that's probably not a good spot. It's not a good spot because the water's too warm. But water temperature varies based on different depths. So if you go just a little bit deeper, the water's going to be a lot colder. So if I'm fishing an area that's really warm, I would just go upstream or downstream and find an area where there's a nice undercut bank, then maybe a deep pool, a lot of trees that'll cool it down on the sides. It's amazing what something like that will do.
It's amazing that you have all that thought. I would just go to the side of a river and throw a hook.
Well, that's step one.
Right.
Is doing that. But when you narrow it down and you want to go after a certain species, understanding a bit about the species can really help. So, like if you're going after bass, understanding the type of habitat that they like, same with trout. Once you get that, then you have a lot more luck at targeting them. Or same with knowing what they like to eat. So smallmouth bass, for example, really like crayfish. They go crazy for crayfish.
Yeah.
So if I want to fish for a smallmouth bass, if I use something that looks like a crayfish, I'll have a lot more luck.
Gotcha.
You throw their food at them, basically.
Who knew? I
something
thought
they're
you were all
familiar
just
with.
out there drinking beer. Okay, so we've talked about that equipment. One of the questions I got was, there is so much to choose from out there. Where do you even begin? What do you need? Obviously you need a fishing pole, but what's a good thing to think about for starting?
You go into any tackle store, there's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're just getting started fishing, probably 99% of that stuff you don't need. It's all really good stuff to have, and eventually as you get going fishing down the line, you spend more time fishing, it's all stuff that could come in handy.
Yeah.
But if you just want to go out, if your goal is to catch a fish, and you don't care what fish, and you're fishing for the first time, a spin cast rod, which is a style with the push button on top, those are probably the easiest ones to get started for younger anglers. And then just a hook, sinker, bobber, and worms.
Ready to go.
And that's just live bait. And with worms, just about anything will bite worms.
Yeah.
Which means you could get a wide range of species. You'll most likely get panfish or sunfish, something like that. You could get something else though. Once you get more skilled and you start using artificial lures, you'll kind of start to dive into other species and start targeting specific ones.
Huh.
Or maybe you just stick with worms. But
Right, you never know.
A lot of times people kind of, you start with worms and they like that and they kind of move on to trying different things.
Right. So I have some questions from folks that I talked in the library, and something you've already mentioned, catch and release. So one person was curious about, is catch and release really injury-free, and is there a better way to remove the hook to ensure injury-free?
So you always have some risk. Because you are catching the fish, but there's ways to alleviate that.
Yes.
Or to reduce it, to better the fish's chances of survival. So first thing is, if I know I'm doing catch and release and I have no intention on keeping it, best thing you can do is actually pinch down your barb. So on the hook, you have that barb right there. You take a pair of pliers, pinch that down. That works. It'll be easier to pull it out of the fish's lip. But also, we do it a lot of times when we're fishing with kids.
Yeah.
So if they ever accidentally hook themselves, even just by walking, sometimes that happens, and they'll clip themselves. Then you can just pop it right out. Same goes with a fish. Other thing is, if I'm fishing for trout, you're going to want to fish when the water's cold. So fish in the early morning hours or in the evening. If it's in October, November, when the water is cold, it doesn't matter so much. But in the summertime, you want to be aware of that. Yeah. If you catch a fish that's used to cold water and you bring it up in the really warm water, it's going to be harder for it to survive.
Oh, right.
Because the water's too warm for it in that area. Other thing is keeping it in the water as much as possible. Remember, that's where they breathe.
Right.
So you bring it out of the water. It's just like, if you held your head underwater, it's the same kind of concept. So the most if you can take the hook off when it's underwater, better the chances right there. Same with things like using a net or things like that. They actually have nets now that mainly have rubber on them, and the rubber ones don't seem to damage the fish as much. And there's a lot of studies out there on that as well. Whereas you have some knots, and nothing wrong with them, but a lot of your standard nets have knots on them. And what those knots will do, think of a fish flopping on it, and it'll kind of ruffle up the scales a little bit.
I see.
Whereas the other nets can be a little bit more gentler. So a lot of people are switching kind of over to that other style.
Can you injure a fish holding a fish? Can you injure its scales?
Yep.
Yeah.
So to kind of reduce that, what a lot of people do is actually wet your hands first. So if you wet your hands, it'll be a lot easier on the fish.
Oh, all right.
Whereas grabbing it with dry hands, you might cause a little bit more damage. But I mean, the big thing is just be careful.
Yeah.
You don't need to go out and get like all this stuff. You don't need like a rubberized net or something like that.
Right.
As long as you try to be gentle with it. Even with catch and release, everything goes great. Or you try to do everything great. Every now and then you might get a fish that swallows the hook, doesn't get a good set in the lip, and that happens.
Yeah.
It's always a bummer when it happens. But what you can do if you don't plan on keeping that fish, is actually cut the line and get it as close as you can to that hook. And what it should do is rust out, or it gives the fish a better chance of survival. If it swallowed it and I start horsing on it, and you're yanking on it, you're going to definitely cause more damage to the fish that way.
Right. Cool. And then the opposite to that is if you're fishing and you catch one and you're like, oh, this is dinner, is there a more humane way to kill it?
So, I mean, everyone has their different ways that they kill it. The best way, though, is typically, not the best way, but you could use, some people just like kind of smack it on the head. You can kind of snap its neck a little, or hit it. Some people just hit it on things.
Yeah.
I don't want to say on things, but just a little kind of rap, and that'll kill it. What you don't want to do is just kind of leave it out.
Right.
You leave it out, then that fish is what it's doing when it's flopping around is suffocating.
Right.
So the most humane way to do is just to kill it instantly.
Is to do it. Yep. Okay. We talked about hookless fishing. When you cut the barb off, that's a more safe hookless fishing way. Lots of people want to know, are waterways safe? Can we eat all the fish we catch in the Vermont waterways? For example, people are worried that the Otter Creek is polluted and not really great. So does that affect the fish? And then can we eat them?
I mean, I look pretty healthy.
But you do. You do.
I eat a lot of fish. But, I mean, basically I tell people, you've got all this food swimming around out there if you want to eat it.
Yeah.
the fish are perfectly healthy to eat. There are some limits to like how many meals you can have, and you can find that on the Vermont Department of Health website. And I believe they actually have it sorted by fish species.
Oh, cool.
So where some, like certain fish species might have more mercury in them than others.
Right. Okay. And then we had a bunch of questions about, back to eating. Inquiring minds want to know, are striped bass really as delicious as people say?
They are delicious, but they're not in Vermont.
Oh, well, there you go. So what's the Vermont equivalent?
Vermonters really like perch.
Oh.
So especially during the wintertime, a lot of people are going after yellow perch or Champlain white perch. Those are by far some of the more popular ones. Walleye is another really popular one.
And where are striped bass then?
Oceans.
No way.
Yep.
Who knew? Not me, obviously. I wrote down the
So
question.
primarily you're going to find them kind of, in oceans, rivers, kind of in that type of environment.
Cool. And then we have some questions about fish hatcheries. Are there rules and regs about how many fish they raise and how many they're allowed to release? And where do those decisions come from?
Yeah. So that's a whole process.
Right.
So typically, like a biologist will make a recommendation, and then that goes up to the hatchery based on how many fish they can actually produce. So there's a limit to how many fish they can produce. So we have 5 fish hatcheries that we operate. One of our hatchery managers could certainly talk to you more about that process. But one of the more common questions that we get asked is, somebody will have a body of water that they want is, well, why don't you put trout in this?
Yeah.
Well, you can't put trout everywhere.
Right.
I know a lot of people would like to fish for them, but there's a reason to it. So if the body of water gets too warm or maybe the habitat's not good, it doesn't make sense for us to put those fish there.
Right.
There are some body of waters that are fairly shallow that we do stock with trout, and those might be for what's called a put-and-take fishery, meaning that we stock it, but we know that it's going to get so much fishing pressure in the spring, it's a nice, maybe it's like a nice spot for families to go.
Yeah.
So typically most of those fish will be caught.
Okay.
Before the water temps start to heat up.
I see.
And there's other ones that we might stock to, try to restore fish populations, things like that. There's always different reasons.
Well, and that dovetail, another patron wanted to know sort of the history of fishing, and she's narrowed it down to, because we have fish hatcheries, does that mean in the past we fished out certain species and that's why they're here? Or is the fish hatchery system just a natural thing that everybody does?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So as with everything, the whole reason we have Fish and Wildlife Department and we have these regulations is because, years ago we didn't have any of this, and you certainly had issues. We had instances primarily with, it could be a wide variety of species. A good one to use would be the turkey. So everyone thinks that, we've always had turkeys in Vermont. That's not true.
Right.
There was a period where we did not have turkeys in Vermont. I believe it was the 60s. I don't have the exact date on the top of my head, but we actually reintroduced them from a very small population that I believe came from New York. And now we have turkeys everywhere.
Right, we do.
So a lot of people, you get used to it. You grew up with it. You think we always had a certain species or something like that. But primarily what the hatcheries, kind of get back to the hatcheries, primarily what they're there for is to kind of keep those populations in check. So allowing us to, if we need to restore a population or just add some angler, for anglers to be able to go out there and have success.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a difficult question to answer because every body of water is so different.
Yes.
So whereas like Champlain's a good one where the lake trout, they're certainly trying to restore that. So it's great lake trout fishery.
Right.
But part of the reason they have that is they're trying to restore the lake trout population a little bit.
Right. Cool. And one of the questions we had from a person who is interested in joining her son who does it at a novice level, what are the best poles and the best fishing holes for beginners?
Okay. Well, as I said with the rods before, I'm not going to tell you like a certain brand or anything like that. I certainly don't want to get into that.
No endorsements.
But no, we won't do that. But if you're just starting out, a spin cast rod, so it's a style with a push button on the end of it. A lot of people use stuff they find at a yard sale. That's perfectly fine. Because 9 times out of 10, when you first get started, or even if you've been fishing your whole life, eventually you probably shut in the car door or something, at least if you're clumsy like me.
Yeah.
So a lot of my rods, and I mean, I fish almost every day. A lot of my stuff came from yard sales. It's perfectly fine to fish with that stuff if you maintain it. So, put new line on it, that type of stuff. But in terms of fishing holes, if you're going for just about anything, you've got Virgins Basin, I already mentioned in this region. If you can find a spot to get in on the Otter Creek, where you got the Otter Creek right out back, there's some good spots if you can find a spot to get in.
Yeah.
I believe there's areas to fish actually right down downtown in Middlebury.
Oh, okay.
Where you got that bridge that goes by. I don't know if that's the town park or what that is.
Yeah, the footbridge.
Yeah, there's some spots you can get in there. That's kind of a nice spot right in town. If you're going for trout, New Haven River's a good spot that can have. That has specific regs for it, but you can find that all in the law book. So you always want to, whenever you go fishing, you want to check the laws and regs first to make sure you're following all of that. But the town of Bristol that's right there, is that?
Yes.
Yeah. So they actually have a town park right on New Haven. That's a really nice spot that they have nice trails that go right to a variety of different fishing holes there. That have actually fairly decent trout fishing. So we've done programs there before for the public and had some good luck with like browns and those type of things.
Okay.
Another good spot would be in Panton where the Dead Creek flows into the Otter Creek.
Okay.
Right, kind of there, and
yes.
right kind of along that main road right there.
Yes.
It's a great fishing. You can do just about anything, and then as you move up follow Dead Creek up into our management area, then it gets into you get a lot of carp that goes up there. It's just panfish, but it's really good bullhead fishing up there as well. So you see a lot of people kind of along the roadside at night, and what they're doing is they're fishing for bullhead.
Yeah. That's really interesting. What do you like to fish for?
Trout primarily.
And I have it in my head, I could be completely wrong, that trout is more like a small interior stream kind of fish, that they're not in great big wide raging rivers.
Depends on the trout.
Okay.
So on the species. So like Lake Champlain, it has lake trout in it, which can be a fairly large fish.
Okay.
You're going to find them down deep. So with all trout species kind of follow the same rules. They like cold water. So kind of your lake dwelling trout, typically, especially this time of year, you're going to find them down a little bit deeper.
Right.
Brook trout are the ones I believe you were thinking of, which are mainly going to be found in streams. So you find them a lot in like the mountain streams. The National Forest is a great spot.
Okay.
You got all those mountain streams flowing flowing out of there that stay cool pretty much all year long.
Right.
Then you'll get like browns will be in there, and then rainbows as well will be in a lot of different lakes. Same with some of our lakes have browns in them. So it all depends on the lake.
And you came...
Lake or body of water.
You came here from where?
Castleton.
Castleton. So where when you're getting set, you're going for a whole day. It's not just a quick fish. You're going to spend the day. You're going to have fun. Where do you like to go? Maybe you don't want to share it.
That's fine. It's not a really confidential spot. I fish bombazine a lot.
Oh.
Whereas it's right down the road from where I live, so it's an excellent spot. Bommel has a lot of, if you're going for bass, there's some really good bass fishing in there for largemouth, smallmouth. But it's also really good brown trout fishing in there as well. And as with any lake, especially, I fish Bommel primarily, but one of the things I really like about it is, based on the time of year, I can easily target like a different species. So during the spring, I primarily am fishing for the browns. Yeah. They're fairly simple to target. They're still kind of upper in the water column at that point, where the water's still cold.
Yes, right.
Right after ice out, so they'll be kind of on top. Then I'll fish for them for a bit, then the water warms up. They go a little bit deeper. I might still target them with downriggers, but from there, a lot of times I'll switch over to bass.
Oh, okay.
Kind of go after a different species.
Oh, that's great.
And then as the water temps cool back, I'll probably switch over to trout in the near future.
So do you have a fish story for us?
Oh. Not off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I mean, most of my fish stories usually involve my dog. So she typically comes with me when I'm fishing. Right. So whether I'm in the boat or I'm walking along a stream, I usually have my dog with me out there. So I try to, it doesn't have to be, I teach fishing for a living, but it doesn't have, I emphasize to a lot of people, it doesn't have to be this huge serious thing.
Right.
You don't need like the $50,000 bass boat to go out there and have a good time.
Right.
You can go out there and just stay on the shoreline and have a
Exactly.
blast, and you can catch similar fish.
Right. Yeah.
You don't need the fancy gear.
You don't. It's true. Now, I have one fish story. The only fish story. Well, I have two. I lied.
Okay.
So I was in Yellowstone Park several years ago, and I just happened to get very lucky. The is it right? Cutthroat trout
Yep.
were swimming upstream, and I just stood there, and literally they were basically on the floor at my feet. That's how far away. And there were gobs of them. There were some people there catching them and measuring them and getting information and then throwing them back, and they would just go right back. And the place where I was standing, they were just swimming up like a little bit of a waterfall. It was really amazing. They were beautiful and a little ugly too. So, and then the other fish story, my daughter wanted to fish. We used to fish on camping trips. She caught, I don't even know what it was, something about this big. And we said, "Oh, great job, Lucy." And we took it off the hook and we threw it back in, and he swam away. And about 20 minutes later, her cousin Ben caught the same darn fish because it had the hook stuck in it that Lucy left that we didn't know she had left in the... So luckily we were able to pull it out. So those are my fish stories.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of my fish stories typically, I mean, I've caught a lot of nice fish, but a lot of when I go out fishing, a lot of times what happens is not what intended.
Yeah.
Those that have gone out on my boat with me know with half the time we end up paddling home. So it's kind of, those type of things are usually what's happening to me. Or went out, about a month ago with a friend of mine and his wife, and we hiked up into the National Forest.
Yeah.
So National Forest has a lot of nice trout ponds in it. That some of them they actually stock with helicopters. So they'll go in and they'll stock fry with helicopters in those ponds because they're so far back. We were walking into a nice pond that was probably 2 miles or so in. We're fishing it. Didn't really have any luck at all or anything like that. But keep in mind, we're 2 miles in. It's a fairly cold day, and I decide, it starts raining, so we got our rain gear on, and I decide I'm going to jump to a rock. No sooner as I jump to that rock, and it's discovered it's 20 feet deep on the other side of that rock. Because I missed it, fell right in. My dog comes right up to me and is basically just saying hi as I'm in the water, and ended up walking, the 2 miles back out, soaking wet.
Soaking wet.
Moral of that story: bring spare clothes. But things happen, and it might not be the fish that actually makes the story.
Right.
Either, it could just be getting out there and having fun with friends fishing, or just going out there and having. You could be an eagle that flies over or something like that. That kind of makes the whole day.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm excited to bring you back. I'm gonna ask you to come back to talk to me about ice fishing.
Okay.
When it gets icy, and then we're gonna maybe get the fly fisher guy to come in, and we'll talk to him too, I hope.
Excellent.
So thanks so much, Corey. This has been fun. I think I've learned a lot, and I hope everybody else has too.
Appreciate you having me.
Thank you.